You're about to listen to the Complete Developer Podcast, the podcast by coders, for coders, about all aspects of life as a developer.
I'm Will, the curmudgeonly experienced developer.
And I'm Beej, the optimistic newbie developer. Welcome to another episode of Complete Developer Podcast. This week, we're talking about what to do in your first week at a new software development job in order to start off on the right foot and set yourself up for success. But before we get started, Will, what have you been fighting this week?
I have been dealing with the interesting interfacing between Delphi DLLs and C# executable code. So a lot of figuring out how to pass pointers back and forth, a lot of pinning things in memory, how a string is encoded, because in .NET it protects us. It's like a string is a string, but they're a little bit closer to the metal. So, they're passing, pointers to ANSI strings, and, there's particular formatting things that are going on there. And, so like if you pass them a pointer to a Unicode string, it doesn't work, or it takes like the behavior I was seeing is it took the first character and would put it in there, but then it assumed that it was truncated after that because it got a termination character, or it had a dead space or something that it interpreted as, hey, this is the end of what I'm supposed to parse. And, having to deal with the difference between things like standard calls and C declarations, and the way that the layout of the functions is set up when they make the DLL. There were some very interesting things with the way that stack frames operated, because when you pass arguments to a method in Delphi, you can say, okay, don't put this on the stack, put it in a CPU register, which works great until you have a language that can't do that. And you try to call it and you try to pass it that way, and it thinks it's pushing it on the stack. And then you get a stack imbalance, which is capable of taking down the Visual Studio debugger, by the way.
Interesting.
It kind of acts like somebody with their hair on fire. It just sort of runs away.
Yeah.
And you eventually go poking around in the event log, and you can go, oh, now I know what happened. But I'm enjoying it. And I'm going to be doing more Delphi, further on. So this will help. And plus just getting these interface bits, we need this for strategic reasons at work. Because most of our other integration has been put something in the database, and something that's polling will get it out and run it, or pass it on the command line to a Delphi executable and then poll and wait to see if some file is done. And the communication mechanisms are not as good as it would be bringing a library in. And so getting stuff up and working, and see, I've got enough of both sides because I've had to deal with low-level Windows API stuff enough from C# that I'm okay. So that's what I've been doing. My side project is still bouncing back and forth. I'm really getting a lot of ups and downs on it, and I'm not real happy with that right now.
Yeah,
of course, I think that's part of the whole startup life cycle. It's just you get a feeling like, okay, it's going to take off and it's going to go somewhere, and then nothing. Mm-hmm. And then it comes up again. And so you feel like you have no ability to schedule your life at all. And so that's what I've been dealing with. So, how about you?
Well, it's been an interesting week. I was on my way to an interview on Wednesday when my sister called to tell me my dad was in the hospital. He was jogging in the gym and tripped over his own feet, fell, and broke his hip. He actually had to have surgery to do a partial hip replacement.
Good grief.
Yeah, it was, the shape of a femur.
Yeah.
He snapped the entire ball off at the neck.
Oh, at the top.
Yeah.
Where it goes into the...
Well, the ball part's called the head of the femur, and then that very, very narrow, the most narrow part of the bone is called the neck, and then it widens out for the
So he
body.
broke it at the neck.
He broke it at the neck, but he snapped it completely off. And so they had to replace that.
My dad's dog had that problem. She broke her leg out hunting one day, and it's interesting trying to get a 100-pound animal into the back of a truck without hurting it when it's in that state, so that you can take it to the vet. Mm-hmm. And that's like the most panicked I've seen my dad since that time I fell out of a tree stand. Well, actually, I stayed in the tree stand. The tree stand just didn't stay in the tree.
So anyways, that was on my way to an interview, and I called work. So I was supposed to work that afternoon, canceled, actually called out for the next few weeks. And then I get to the interview, and the recruiter's supposed to meet me there, walk me in and stuff. She calls and tells me that she's having car trouble and not going to be able to make it. Going in without her. This is nothing against her. Just
that happens.
That happened. Needless to say, I was not at my best walking into that interview, but I knew that going in, and I just thought, I have to take all of this and put it to the side, not think about it, not let it affect the interview. I was thinking, I'm going to bomb this interview because I've got all this other stuff going on, but I'm going to put it all aside, and I'm going to go in there with a smile on my face and do my best. And I rocked it out. Yeah. They called on Friday to extend an offer. So tonight, instead of drinking beer, Will and I are celebrating with some 15-year-old Pappy Van Winkle bourbon.
It's good, too.
Yeah, I have had about 5 years. I'm at the very, very last of it. I'm saved. So we're finishing off the last of my my very expensive, probably the best bourbon I've ever had.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. So I've actually signed the paperwork, and will have started my new job by the time this episode airs. And it's a contract to hire position. So if you listened to the recruiter episode with Lena, you'll know that I'm technically an employee of the recruiting agency until I get hired on permanently. Obviously, I'm very excited about this. I was at the hospital with my dad when I got the call, and I had to chase him down the hallway because a physical therapist had taken him just out walking to kind of, they had to walk him so much before he could be released. After that, the first person I told was you.
Yep.
And that's kind of where the idea for this episode came from, as I was asking Will about what I need to know going in to starting a job as a developer. And we were talking, and we were texting really, and I said, hey, why don't you write an episode about this, and I can ask questions in the episode, and then that way it's something that I know a few of our listeners have talked about wanting to hear about. But speaking of celebrating, I have something kind of fun for IoTs, so let's roll the music. This week for IoTs, I have something that you can build for your next party, and that is the Raspberry Pi Photo Booth. It uses a Raspberry Pi 3 to make a touchscreen photo booth that instantly uploads to Google Photos. It uses the Raspbian Jessie OS and has a great step-by-step tutorial that even Raspberry Pi newbies can follow. It also introduces you to using API keys. Fun little tutorial, especially for people learning or people wanting to get started in IoT. And the hardware is pretty simple. It's just a Raspberry Pi 3 touchscreen camera, and then whatever kind of housing and stand you want for it. And the software is just the Raspbian Jessie OS, touchscreen selfie scripts, and then the Google Photos API. And I'll have a link for that in the show notes. All right, guys. Well, thank you for all of the comments that we've received and the reviews on iTunes. We have a winner, J Greer 430. You are going to be receiving an autographed copy of Soulbound by Bethany Adams. Guys, if you want to check out Bethany's book, you can find it on Amazon or follow the link in our show notes. And I highly recommend it. I've been reading it for the past couple of weeks, and it is phenomenal. So check it out. JGreer430. Shoot us an email or a message on Twitter or Facebook. Get in touch with us, and we will get you your autographed book. So, who's talking to us?
We got a review from a new listener, and that is Audrey Young, asking, as someone who's never done it before but is interested in starting, where would you suggest I start?
And this, I talked to her a little bit about this. Audrey's actually a friend of mine that I've been encouraging to look into coding because she has the right mindset for it.
Yeah.
And so she was asking where to start for listening to our episodes, actually. So I told her to go back and listen to episode 1. I said, ignore the audio quality, but
For a while.
yeah, but that's a really great starting point because in that we're talking tech to non-developers, and that'd be a great starting point. I also pointed her to a few other places, like Code Newbies, which is an organization that Will and I participate in and are friends with the founder.
Yeah. And that's definitely, I think, a really good thing because, the meetings that we've had with people in that community and with people, like the meetup groups and all that has been really, really positive, I think.
I mean, that's how we met Jason, our audio guy.
Yeah.
And we've made friends through that, through podcasting. It's just getting out in the community is great. We're actually going to be having an episode in the future on community involvement. But thanks, Audrey. We've got a CDP swag bag just for you. And if you'd like a CDP swag bag of your own, leave us a review in iTunes or comment on the website or any of our social media. We post all of our episodes to Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Google+. So jumping right into the episode, we're going to start talking about why you should actually have a plan when starting a new job as a developer.
Yeah, the biggest thing is to avoid coming in and looking completely lost. That's hugely valuable just in terms of being able to confidently go forward and actually do things. Because when you're flopping around like a fish out of water, it is obvious. Yeah, it comes off as kind of unprofessional. Plus, it makes it easier to look more experienced when you're coming in kind of like you already know what's going on, even if you actually don't. And that in turn starts a feedback loop that boosts your confidence.
And boosts the other
people treat you like that.
It boosts others' confidence in you.
Yeah.
And good first impressions are a lot less work than overcoming bad first impressions.
Yeah.
You walk into a job with a plan of this is what, now I've heard of the 30, 60, 90, 30-day plan, 60-day plan, 90-day plan for onboarding. You could even do that, bring that down some to even having a day, week, month plan.
Yeah. And this is just for the first week.
Yeah.
Really, because it's more about the very, very first impressions. We probably need to do another episode in the future, maybe about longer time periods.
Well, one thing that I had thought about doing was talking after I've started about my experience. And what we could do is spend part of the episode, like the early part, talking about my experience. I don't think it'd be enough for an entire episode, but I can talk about my experience and then we can go into, advice for me for down the line. So,
okay. Yeah, that would work pretty well. The other thing is you want to establish early rapport with your team so that you can keep from losing motivation. Because, when you get into a new job and you don't know anybody, if you don't get in there and actually socialize, you probably won't. If you don't do it fairly quick. Like I was talking to one of the guys from the Code Newbie meetup. He and I went to lunch today, and we were talking about how we got over our awkwardness when we were younger. And the thing is like you realize that you have to get in there and actually socialize, because if you don't, you're going to think about it too much and then you're going to freeze and you're not going to be able to. So it's almost like the 5-second rule for dropped food.
Yes, exactly.
It's not actually,
I know,
necessarily scientifically accurate, but it works pretty well.
No, I get exactly what you're saying, because I do the same thing, and it's something that I picked up at a very young age, and I learned being the son of a preacher and being kind of almost thrust into public, I wouldn't say public speaking, but into the public light at
You
church.
have people
and
looking
stuff.
at you.
Yeah, you had people looking at you and stuff that if I overthought it, which I have a tendency to do, I would freeze up. But if I just barreled through it,
Yeah, it just works better.
it does. Yeah.
'Cause the thing is you get over the fear by doing something. You know, it's like that goes away after you've done it. It's
Now,
backward, but unfortunate.
It is, but I'll say this, what worked for me and what I've continued to do throughout my life is I found that if I had a plan beforehand, if I thought about it beforehand of what would I do in this situation, what would I do in that situation, and I had a plan, then the barreling through it wasn't fumbling, bumbling.
It wasn't reckless.
Yes, it wasn't reckless. It was, I had a goal-oriented barreling through it. So Will's broken this down into kind of two categories: 7 things to do at your first week in a new development job, and 7 things not to do.
Yeah, the points are actually related in each as well. So the first thing is you should befriend the executive assistant, secretary, different project managers. In fact, try to make friends with as many people as possible. Like, go around and actually social, be a
good
little bit
person.
Yeah, but it's more than that, because you've got, as we were discussing before, you've got to actually kind of jump in there.
Yeah, and I could see this for people that are more socially awkward or more introverted and less outgoing than me.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, doing this is like a natural thing.
Yeah, and it is for me too, because when you drill it enough, it becomes part of you.
Yeah.
And I want to throw this out there because, like, every blog seems to say, "Oh, make friends with the secretary," and and they do it in a very patronizing tone that I don't appreciate very much, because I don't think that's really where you want to go with this. It's best for both parties, you and the other party, that you get a good working relationship going from the outset. And particularly with administrative assistants, secretaries, those sorts, they've got a bit of a top-down view that you don't get in the kind of work that we do. And, project managers don't have it either. Like, it's that eagle eye view that a C-level executive gets, but this is a person that you can actually walk up and talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And you can help them and they can help you, right? This is
mutually beneficial.
There's an economy of relationship here. It's not, you don't go into it with the attitude, I'm going to use the secretary to have political pull.
Yeah.
It's the fact that, hey, I can help them. They've got somebody that's in IT. If their computer is screwing up and they don't want to get embarrassed by calling tech support, maybe you can bail them out. And, oh, by the way, you need to know where the pencils are and where the coffee is. And, like, it should not be a parasitic relationship in either direction.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's a friendship.
Yeah.
Is what you should develop. I mean, this is someone that probably knows most of the people in the office, and you get to know this person. They're probably an outgoing person, because most people that are attracted to that kind of a job are outgoing, friendly people.
Yeah, and that makes it easier to socialize with other people in the office as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because they'll introduce you, they'll help you out.
I know I've worked in offices where it was a bigger organization, and I became friends with the secretary because she wasn't a secretary. I became friends with the front desk person because she was who I saw every day walking in, and just friendly conversations with her led to her saying, "Hey, have you met these people? Because you have a lot in common with them, and I think you guys would get along really well."
Yeah, and they always know.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing too with your front desk person. Like, it's very easy for programmers to be somewhat demeaning with those people, because you get a lot of programmers that are kind of elitist, and they go, "Oh, this person's doing this because they're not as smart," and that's not really true in the first sense. But the second sense is you're actually kind of screwing yourself over, because there's something really nice about going to work and walking in the front door and saying good morning and having somebody say it back.
That's true.
And both of you mean it. Mm-hmm. Like, that's how you start a good day. And every place I've worked, I make sure and go and say good morning to somebody every day, because that's a feedback loop that you really, really want, so that you can actually enjoy your job. It seems like such a small thing, but it really isn't.
Yeah, it's something that you don't think about until you don't have it.
Yeah.
And you miss it.
I've worked at a couple of jobs where I didn't have that, and I didn't last long there.
Mm-hmm.
So the second point is to figure out your actual job expectations. And I know that you think those were communicated to you during your interview. However, they were not. And, there'll be something like, oh, it's really, really important that we put stuff in the time system. And it's just like there's the one guy that just has to have that right. And you're not going to find that out in an interview, more than likely. You're going to find that out your first day on the job or your second day or something like that. And so you want to establish this early, particularly with what your boss expects versus what was actually said during the interview. Because remember, you got a compressed version of what's actually expected. Now that you're onboarded, there's a different set of expectations versus what you tell an outsider, because now you're an insider.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You also have to figure out what your coworkers expect. That will not be the same as what your boss expects. Your boss may go, oh, I expect you to be here, from this time to this time and get these things done. But your coworkers are like, okay, don't do this way. Don't cause me problems. Like, you figure out how to not create work for the people around you.
Yeah, and these things include everything from the way people typically dress at work to how loud they are to expectations around breaks and lunches.
Because nobody tells you during an interview that, oh, well, we go out to lunch every Friday as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And, talk about business stuff. But that expectation may well be there.
They also don't tell you, oh, by the way, Shirley over here makes great coffee, and we all wait till she gets in to make the coffee.
Or, somebody makes terrible coffee.
Yeah.
I have found though that the people that make the alleged terrible coffee are actually the people whose coffee I like. And one of the things I like about it is that if I want coffee and they made it, it's still there. I'm pretty simple in that regard. I'm not a coffee snob like you.
Well, most of the time when people say so-and-so makes terrible coffee, it's because they make coffee strong enough for me to actually like.
Yeah. I don't want light to get through it when it pours.
Yeah. Exactly. That's tea.
Yeah, exactly. It should look like scalding hot Guinness.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this: the best coffee I ever had was Puerto Rican coffee made by a friend of mine from Puerto Rico.
Yeah,
and you could stand a spoon up in it.
Yeah.
Great when you have to stay up all night and write a paper.
But those expectations. A lot of times you'll be told, okay, this job is casual. You can wear jeans and a t-shirt, but go in the first day and don't do that.
Oh, no. I mean, I would say at least be business casual.
Yeah, at least for a little while till you feel it out.
Yeah.
Because they may say, yeah, you can dress casual, and there may be people there that dress casually, but look at where they stand organizationally and how other people treat them before you start doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like where I work now, I dress casually because that's the way all the programmers dress. Like the fact that I'm not wearing shorts and flip-flops every day, I'm less casual and I'm wearing jeans and a t-shirt. But I've also worked at other places where they'll say, oh, you can totally dress casual. And then you go in there and the programmers that are actually respected are in khakis and a polo shirt every day. And there's a couple of programmers that they think are kind of losers and they're not really going anywhere in the company and people talk down to them, and they're in jeans and a t-shirt. It's when you go in, you need to dress well at first and figure out which tribe you actually want to belong to.
This also goes back to the first impressions.
Yes, it does.
Because you come in your first day dressed sloppily in a place where that's allowed but looked down upon, and you're going to always have the stigma.
Eventually it fades away, but yeah, you don't want to.
Yeah, it's a hard fight to get rid of that. Whereas if you go in and you're dressed business casual, and they told you could come in casual, and everybody's dressed casual, then you just look like you're
well prepared
and ready to start a new job.
Yeah, and where I'm working now, I got told they're like, yeah, don't dress up for the interview. There's no point in it. And of course, I did the same thing. I wore a suit and tie to the interview. Part of the deal too is setting your own mental expectations. Because if you're dressed sloppy, especially when you're starting a new place, a lot of times at least I find for myself that it doesn't put me in the proper state of mind to start out.
Well, you guys have been listening to my stories about interviewing, and I've had my top picks in my places that I even told the recruiters, look, I don't want to work there. And all of the ones that were my top picks, the people interviewing me were casual. Usually, like, the most dressy was jeans and a polo.
Yeah.
And that's because he was the owner of the company. You know, the places where the people interviewed me were in suits and ties. I did not care much for the company culture. Now, that's me. And that's my personality. Somebody else, I know several people that are around the same level I am that would like that. Now, it's not that I can't work in a place where I'm expected to wear a suit and tie every day. It's just not what I prefer.
Right. The next point is find the gremlins in the code base you'll be working with. You should try to start doing this the first week. You're not going to find them all. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a corollary to this is if there are no gremlins, then either there is absolutely no code,
or you need to look harder.
Yeah. Like if you go in there and the code base looks pristine, you know, best practices are followed, and you can't find the gremlin, it's entirely possible it's not in the code. For instance, you haven't shipped. You have no client. It has no contact with the real world. Like, figure that out early. Because that's going to shape the rest of your time there is what those gremlins actually are. The other thing is that gremlins in the code base are very instructional. So if there's quirks in the way things are implemented, that asking about those can help you understand the deeper thought processes that are going on. So for instance, I've seen a lot of, there's a system I worked on 2 years ago that, we were doing .NET and we weren't using Link. It was straight ADO calls, like old school. And I was like, why are we doing this? This is harder than, now granted, I don't like ORMs, but this is way harder than other ways to do this. Why are we doing it this way? And what it came down to was performance. We had a whole bunch of data just pouring into the system, and we could not get the performance out of it that we could do with a table valued parameter getting pitched in.
Okay.
And there were other things in the mix there too that were making it more difficult, plus the structure of the team. So we had people on the team that were not SQL developers, they were necessarily the most solid in .NET, but they were very solid SQL developers. And as a result, they tended to put as much stuff in the SQL versus in .NET.
Okay, I see that.
And so it's instructive towards the team structure and towards what your team is capable of based off of where the weird things are in the code.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense.
Now, if you're talking about best practices, and you've seen this, so I guess you can kind of take this one away too, because you and I walked through some stuff.
The places where a company isn't implementing the best practices tend to be places where they either don't know about impending risks, or they've chosen to ignore it for a very specific reason. And by digging into this, you can often get insight that you'll be able to leverage later.
Yeah. Because sometimes they are ignoring things like, I don't know, 3-tiered database design or a 3-tiered, business application design. Like they have their UI directly calling into the database. Why is that? Because you really don't want to do that in terms of, SQL injection and, tying things to other things that it doesn't need to be tied to. But a lot of places will do that simply because they had to get an app out quickly. They had very, very rapid growth. They had poor programmers before. And these are things that you need to find out fairly early on, and they're not going to come up in the interview, but you need to know them by the end of the first week.
So when you're starting a job, like you're talking about all these things, I mean, what is the expectation? And this is going off the reservation here a little bit, but what is it like going in that first few days? I mean,
it's annoying.
I'm assuming that there's not a lot of expectation for for me to be writing code this first week, more to be reading and understanding the code that's there.
Yeah, which that's something I really, really hate about most people's onboarding process, because I've worked at places where it was at least a week before I was allowed to write a line of code. And I'm like, guys, let me do something. Like, okay. That's really one of my pet peeves. Now, where I am now, like 2 hours after I got there, they're like, because he who shall not be named is like, oh no, he's going to get some work done.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, he knew you, and he knew that that's just the best use of your time was to put you in there working with it.
Well, and he's also seen me get bored.
Yeah.
And is not in favor. So, yeah, I kind of had that going for me, from the get go. But that really, that's the big thing. You're going into a governmental environment, and governmental environments and really, really large corporations, a lot of times for the first week, they're not going to let you do anything, because they may have you in there and they have to get so many signatures to actually get you into where you can get to the source code that you're not going to be in it for a week.
That makes sense.
And so you may have to like pair program with somebody. Like, legitimately, I've had to do this.
Well, see, I don't mind that, and it may be because I am more junior, but I don't mind that the first week or so, because it's, going into a new position that, when I started doing stuff with you, I'd already been training with you for months.
Yeah.
And I'd seen the stuff you were working on being developed that whole time. Like, as I was sitting across from you studying all my own stuff, every now and then you'd be like, hey, Beach, come here and check this out, because you had something interesting you were doing or something you wanted to show me so that I could learn. Yeah. And so I'd already been kind of in the code on a lot of things.
Yeah. And I kind of put you in a weird spot too, because that was not a standard internship.
Yeah.
And I've had to explain that to recruiter after recruiter. I feel like I need to get
I've actually changed the wording on my resume, because after talking with you and a few other recruiters and describing it, we've come to decide that it was more an apprenticeship.
Yeah.
Especially since I did get paid for some of the work.
Yeah.
And it looks better going into...
and it makes it easier on me too, because I don't have a 30-minute phone conversation trying to go, internship is the only word we could find that was close.
Yeah. Apprenticeship, I like I said, I've changed it to where instead of saying intern web developer, it says apprentice web developer.
Yeah.
And that's made explaining it a lot easier. And it's made explaining why I know certain aspects of coding really in depth, like at almost a mid-level developer level, but other areas I'm very junior.
Yeah.
And so it's made explaining that easier by saying, this was an apprenticeship. I had specific projects that I worked on, and
that makes a huge difference. Another thing, when you're starting out, start filling out the political currents. If you think you got into a job that has no politics, think again. It's sort of like no bugs in the code. This is a bug in the social code, is politics. And the sooner you get over the fact that that's there, the better off you'll be. The odds are good if you got a position, either someone there wanted it, they had someone in mind, or they didn't think it needed to be filled. There's probably at least one of those people there if you have a team of any size.
Maybe more than one.
Yeah.
But you also think there's going to be someone who's greatly helped by the fact that you are there now.
Yeah. And those people may not be readily apparent. Mm-hmm. Like the person that most wants you to fail may be very friendly.
Yeah.
And the person that most, would be helped most by you succeeding may be, somewhat hostile. I had a job at one point where the CEO and I had done Kung Fu together. And literally the day before my interview, I had busted his nose. And that's a really weird feeling to walk into an interview with, but it's very empowering. But one of his subordinates, really did need my help, but he was very negative because he and the CEO had some political back and forth. Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing he did to me was he gave me a project timeline for something I was supposed to do that I couldn't complete in that timeline. per what they understood the timeline, what it would take and all. And I worked like 70-hour weeks, and I got it done. And I got it done so much ahead of what was expected that it actually caused him problems. And then after that, we were totally cool. We went to lunch all the time. But it was just like a rite of passage thing. And, sometimes those people, once they realize what they can get, they'll help you. But there's other people that realize, hey, you're a threat.
Yeah.
And those things shift early on. So, be aware of those political currents because they will burn you if you're not careful.
Yeah. And it's not that, I would probably say that not everywhere is going to be like that.
No.
And not to the extreme of that example.
It's not, and it's usually much, much milder.
Yeah.
But you do need to start kind of feeling that out. And
one of the things that we do with this show is we give examples of the extremes of cases.
So that you can wind it down and go, okay, this is in this direction. And so it matches. Yeah.
And to help understand it, because I would say the majority of people are not going to be in a situation like that.
Yeah.
But by expressing that, they can go, people can see that and understand what we're talking about. And it's not an abstract concept. It's that happened to you.
Yeah. And, the guy was awesome friend after that. I mean, it turned out to, he was one of my greatest advocates after that.
Yeah.
And so feeling out those political currents is really important. One thing you want to do early is to try to go to lunch with other people fairly regularly, like use that as a meet and greet type thing. I know it's not cheap, and especially if you haven't had a job for a while, but that gets you outside of the office. People are more comfortable just because it's a different environment, and that a lot of things will leak out, good, bad, and different, that will actually tell you what the political landscape looks like.
It's funny, where I've been working as a kind of front desk sales associate, I go in the back and sit in the break room to eat my lunch.
Yeah.
And almost none of the other associates do that. They go out or they, go sit in the office or something, but all the therapists sit in the back.
Yeah.
And I've gotten to become friends with almost every therapist there just because I sit back there and talk to them, and none of the other, I think there's one or two that are friends with some of the therapists that go back there and sit, but most of them don't.
Yeah. And that's just very bad in business context. Like whenever I eat lunch alone, my gut instinct on that is this shouldn't be happening very often. I mean, sometimes I will go eat lunch alone because I just need a minute. But most of the time it's, you need to be forging relationships. Like we're pack animals. Or not pack animals as in carrying a load, but pack animals as in like wolves.
Yeah.
Human beings are very tribal, and this builds tribe. The next thing you need to try to do your first week, you may not be able to exactly, is fix a problem. Fix something in the code base. Like get a bug. If you can get into the bug tracking system and pick something easy and say, look, I want to bust something. I want to, because the biggest thing is you want to be able to test your development environment. So you want to test that, okay, I can pull things from source control. I can compile. I can run my code because I have all the components I need. And I know the workflow for getting it, things pushed to source control, for, putting in my check-in comments, for making sure that I have all the workflow steps down for, it's saying I finished a bug, all the bits and pieces that have to be in there. Like you want that laid out on paper so that you have something to refer to, and you want to do it early. And one thing is this gets you into a good cadence. But another thing is it makes the team hopeful that you're going to work out. Because when you don't do anything for a week, you've still been drawing a paycheck and you've still been around and you've probably been interrupting other people. So they need to start seeing value that goes, okay, at some point this stops and this person puts in more than they take.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you want to set that tone.
Yeah, and the other thing too is it just setting the tone is a big deal, and comparing that to leeching time from other people. Like I find that it distinguishes a lot of people, because a lot of developers are really wanting to crawl into the code and look at a bunch of stuff. And it's like, no, take something you can fix and go fix it.
Show your value.
Yeah.
Within the first week. It doesn't mean don't crawl in the code and understand it, but also show some value.
Yeah, because they can get lots of people to understand it.
Yeah.
They can post it on GitHub for free, and lots of people will understand it.
Doesn't mean that many people are going to be making pull requests.
Right. Those are the people that are valuable. Like the people that read code in an open source project, that's not what provides the value.
Mm-hmm.
So, think about your value prop on that.
Yeah.
The next and, final thing to do is to set up a routine. Figure out how you're going to start your day every day. And this can be something as simple as, okay, I'm going to check my email. I'm going to get a coffee. I'm going to find, I'm going to have one small bug that I fix before I jump into the bigger code base. I do this a lot.
I would suggest making this part of your plan.
Yes.
Going in is, one of the first things you're going to do in your plan is to set up a routine.
Right.
Because
you don't want to have a 9 o'clock in the morning meeting, like the first day, and then the second day get surprised by that same meeting happening again.
Yeah.
Because it's disorienting and you're already in a new environment.
Mm-hmm. And, figure out what you're going to do last thing at night in order to be ready to roll the next morning.
Yeah. Because, it's a lot easier at the end of the day, when you're kind of winding down to plan the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, plans change, but plan that next day out so that when you get there in the morning, the first thing you do is you immediately get something done.
Yeah, we've talked about this. You've said this many times about coming in and doing something simple, like even leaving some work for the next day.
Yeah.
That's simple so that you can start off with a win.
Yes. And, of course, this is also, another thing you can do is code katas first thing in the morning. If you can get away with it. Don't do this during the first week, though.
Depending on where you're working. Actually, the interview that I had, I totally rocked out the whiteboarding problem. And when we were talking about it, the interviewer said, well, there's not a whole lot I can ask you to do to refactor that. And I said, well, I've been doing code katas every morning, and this was very similar to one that I actually wrote. It was very similar to the one that I wrote for the Code Newbie, and I gave him the link to it. I said, check this out, because this is the code kata that I wrote for our meetup. And so he wrote that down, and we talked about code katas for a while, and he thought that was just the greatest idea of starting your morning off with a code kata.
Yeah, just start off. Because you can solve a problem that you've already solved before. Like if you can show a gain or they can't show a loss, and you can go, look, yeah, I do this every morning, and it's a warm up.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It's like 10 minutes, and it's like a morning ritual thing, and I go on with my day.
Yeah.
And because of that, I go faster.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty hard to argue with. Plus, think about how much time most people spend in the mornings. Like 10 minutes is nothing.
Another thing you can compare it to is stretching before you exercise.
Yeah.
Most people, even if they don't exercise regularly, they've heard about stretching before exercising. And
I wish I had yesterday.
Yeah.
Severely, actually. I did squats yesterday, and I didn't stretch. I did, medium heavy for me. And, I feel like I've been caned.
I went to the chiropractor today before coming here just because I mowed the lawn over at my mom's place this weekend, helping out. And
yeah,
even on a riding mower, that lawn is so rocky and bumpy.
You're shaking the whole time and you're having to be tense.
Mm-hmm. That pretty much wraps us up. Before we close everything out, Will, what do you have for us this week for Tricks of the Trade?
Well, I want to point out that, the first week of work is really an exercise in beginning with the end in mind. And one other thing I didn't add in this episode that I thought about putting in there is to think about what would make you quit your job and to think about it early. And the reason to do this is not so that you have something that you can have a hair trigger on, but more along the lines of where your boundaries are. For instance, early in my career, I worked at a startup, which, I mentioned before, for 2 weeks, I didn't have a desk and all that kind of stuff. And I put up with getting chewed out pretty regularly. I put up with having to drive into the office physically to change answering machine messages on July 4th and other holidays and weekends, and getting calls at weird times, and all those kind of things, and a lot of just really obnoxious life experiences. And the reason I had to do that was because I did not determine what my boundaries were. And so I want to throw this out there, that think about, as you're starting a new job, what it takes to make you quit that job. And, as I said, it's not so much about, looking for a reason to quit as it is in setting personal boundaries early and having those expectations in your head so that you communicate them clearly from the get-go, versus, finding yourself backed into a corner and then having to tell somebody to stop doing something that you should have never allowed them to start. So that's what I've got. Begin with the end in mind.
Stand by for Titanfall.
If you have a question or comment for us, please email us at neckbeards@completedeveloperpodcast.com. Our theme music is an excerpt from Stand By for Titanfall by Pure Bells, available on SoundCloud and licensed under Creative Commons. The intro music for IoTs is Hillbilly Hip Hop by Jason Belcher. For references, show notes, and to sign up to our email list, be sure and check out the website at CompleteDeveloperPodcast.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CompleteDevPod and like our page on Facebook to keep up with the news about the show. Thanks for listening. See you next time.